The British government is in absolute chaos right now. Just 1 minute ago, Prime Minister Keir Starmer appeared on live television, and what happened next has sent shockwaves through Westminster and across the entire nation. Sources inside Downing Street are confirming that resignation papers are being prepared as we speak. This isn't speculation anymore. This isn't political theatre. This is the real deal, and what's about to unfold will change British politics forever. The revelations that came out during that broadcast are so explosive, so damaging, that there's simply no way back for Starmer. His own party members are turning against him, cabinet ministers are distancing themselves, and the British people are demanding answers. What you're about to hear will leave you absolutely stunned, because the truth that's been hidden from the public for months has finally come to light, and it's far worse than anyone could have imagined. The emergency broadcast started at exactly 8 p.m, and from the very first moment, you could see something was terribly wrong. Keir Starmer walked onto that stage looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. His face was pale, his hands were shaking, and his voice trembled as he began to speak. This wasn't the confident Prime Minister we've seen at press conferences. This was a broken man who knew his time was up. The interviewer, a veteran journalist known for not holding back, wasted no time getting straight to the accusations. And that's when everything started to unravel. Documents had been leaked just hours before the broadcast. Documents that show a pattern of deception that goes back months, possibly even years. We're talking about financial dealings that were never disclosed. We're talking about meetings that were kept off the official record. We're talking about promises made to powerful figures behind closed doors, promises that directly contradict everything Starmer has been telling the British public. The first bombshell dropped when the interviewer pulled out printed copies of email exchanges between Starmer's office and several major corporate donors. These weren't your typical political donations. These were transactions worth millions of pounds, and they came with strings attached. The emails revealed that policy decisions that affect ordinary working families across Britain, were being influenced by these donors. Healthcare reforms that were supposedly designed to help the National Health Service were actually crafted to benefit private healthcare companies who had funneled money into Labour's campaign coffers. Infrastructure projects that were meant to create jobs were being steered toward contractors who had personal relationships with senior Labour officials. This is corruption at the highest level, and it's been happening right under our noses, but it gets worse. Much worse. The second revelation hit even harder. Phone records obtained through a Freedom of Information request show that Starmer had been in regular contact with foreign government officials. Discussions that were never reported to Parliament as required by law. We're talking about conversations with leaders from countries that have questionable human rights records. We're talking about negotiations that could compromise Britain's sovereignty and national security. When the interviewer confronted him with these phone records, Starmer's response was absolutely pathetic. He stuttered, he dodged, he tried to claim that these were routine diplomatic conversations, but the evidence tells a completely different story. These calls happened late at night, they lasted for hours, and they were deliberately hidden from public scrutiny. The studio audience, which had been carefully selected to represent a cross-section of British voters, erupted in anger. People were shouting, some were standing up and pointing at the screen. The raw emotion in that room was palpable because these ordinary citizens finally understood the magnitude of what had been done to them. They had voted for change. They had believed in Labour's promises to clean up politics and put working people first. And now they were watching their Prime Minister exposed as just another politician willing to sell out his principles for power and money. One woman in the audience, a nurse from Manchester, stood up with tears streaming down her face and asked Starmer directly how he could look healthcare workers in the eye after what he'd done. The silence that followed was deafening. Starmer had no answer. He just stared down at his notes, unable to meet her gaze. Then came the third revelation, and this one was the knockout punch. A whistleblower from inside number 10, someone who has worked closely with Starmer for years, came forward with recordings, actual audio recordings of private meetings where Starmer and his closest advisors discussed how to manipulate public opinion, how to bury negative stories, and how to attack anyone who dared to question their agenda. In these recordings, you can hear Starmer's real voice, not the polished public persona, but the calculating political operator who sees voters as nothing more than numbers to be managed. You can hear him laughing about concerns raised by Labour backbenchers. You can hear him dismissing criticism from unions and grassroots members as irrelevant noise. And most damning of all, you can hear him explicitly stating that he knew certain policies would hurt working class families, but that the political benefits outweighed the human cost. When excerpts from these recordings were played during the live broadcast, the reaction was instantaneous. Social media exploded. Within minutes, hashtags calling for Starmer's resignation were trending worldwide. News organisations scrambled to verify the authenticity of the recordings, and when multiple independent audio forensics experts confirmed they were genuine, the floodgates opened. Opposition parties immediately seized the moment. Conservative MPs who had been relatively quiet suddenly found their voices, calling emergency debates and demanding Starmer appear before Parliament to explain himself. The Liberal Democrats issued a statement saying that if Starmer had any shred of integrity left, he would resign immediately. Even more telling was the response from within Labour itself. Several backbench MPs who had privately expressed concerns about Starmer's leadership for months now felt emboldened to speak publicly. One by one, they began posting statements on social media calling for him to step down. Some were carefully worded, expressing disappointment and calling for accountability. Others were brutal in their criticism, stating bluntly that Starmer had betrayed everything the Labour Party stands for and that he no longer had the moral authority to lead. The cabinet, those senior ministers who are supposed to be Starmer's closest allies, were conspicuously silent for the first hour after the broadcast ended. But that silence spoke volumes. Behind the scenes, according to multiple sources with direct knowledge of the situation, an emergency meeting was convened at Downing Street. Cabinet ministers arrived through back entrances, avoiding the media circus that had gathered outside. Inside that meeting, the discussions were heated and desperate. Some ministers argued for a united front, suggesting they could weather this storm if they all stood together and denied everything. But others, the ones who still have political futures to think about, made it clear they weren't going to go down with a sinking ship. They demanded answers. They wanted to know what else might come out. And most importantly, they wanted to know if Starmer was planning to resign or if they needed to force him out. The political calculus here is absolutely brutal. Every cabinet minister knows that their own career prospects are now tied to how they respond to this crisis. If they stand by Starmer and more revelations emerge, they'll be painted as complicit. If they abandon him too quickly, they might be accused of disloyalty by the party faithful. It's a no-win situation, and you can bet that political advisors are working overtime right now, conducting polls, monitoring social media sentiment and calculating the best path forward for their bosses. Meanwhile, Conservative Party headquarters was apparently celebrating. Sources say champagne bottles were opened as they watched the Labour government implode on live television. Conservative strategists immediately began preparing attack ads and campaign materials, knowing this scandal could keep Labour out of power for a generation. But here's where things get even more complicated. The revelations aren't just about Starmer personally. The documents and recordings implicate several other senior Labour figures as well. The Chancellor, who had been seen as a potential successor to Starmer, is named in several of the leaked emails regarding financial arrangements with donors. The Foreign Secretary appears in phone records showing undisclosed contacts with controversial foreign officials. The Home Secretary is heard in one of the recordings agreeing with Starmer's assessment that certain unpopular policies needed to be pushed through regardless of public opinion. What we're witnessing isn't just the fall of one Prime Minister. We're watching the potential collapse of an entire government. The question now is whether Labour can contain this crisis or whether it will spread like wildfire through the entire party apparatus. Already, there are calls for a full independent inquiry into Labour's finances and decision-making processes. Opposition parties are demanding that the Metropolitan Police launch a criminal investigation into potential corruption and misconduct in public office. The timing of all this couldn't be worse for Labour. There are crucial votes coming up in Parliament on major legislation. There are international summits where Britain needs to be represented. There are economic challenges that require steady leadership. And instead, the government is paralysed, consumed by an internal crisis that gets worse with each passing hour. Financial markets reacted immediately to the news. The pound dropped against major currencies as traders priced in political instability. The FTSE experienced significant volatility as investors worried about what this means for Britain's economic future. Business leaders issued statements expressing concern about the uncertainty and calling for a quick resolution to the crisis. International allies are also watching nervously. American officials, speaking anonymously, expressed worry about Britain's ability to fulfill its commitments to NATO and other international partnerships while dealing with domestic political turmoil. European leaders, many of whom already had complicated relationships with Starmer's government, are undoubtedly reconsidering their negotiating strategies on everything from trade deals to security cooperation. The media feed-in frenzy that followed the broadcast was unlike anything seen in British politics in decades. Every major news organisation deployed their full resources to cover the story. Reporters camped outside Downing Street, outside the homes of cabinet ministers, outside Parliament. Camera crews fought for position to get the best shots of the chaos unfolding. Newspapers that had already gone to press for the next morning scrambled to reprint with updated front pages featuring the scandal. Television news channels cleared their schedules to provide wall-to-wall coverage, bringing in every political expert, constitutional scholar and former politician they could find to analyse what was happening. And the analysis was damning. Former Labour Prime Ministers and senior party figures from previous governments were being asked to comment, and many expressed shock and disappointment. Some refused to defend Starmer, instead talking about how this scandal damaged the party's reputation and undermined public trust in politics generally. Others were more direct, saying that what Starmer had done was indefensible and that he needed to resign immediately to allow the party to begin rebuilding. Public opinion polls conducted in the hours immediately after the broadcast showed catastrophic numbers for Labour. Support for the party had plummeted by double digits. Starmer's personal approval ratings crashed to historic lows. When asked whether Starmer should resign, over 70% of respondents said yes, including a significant portion of people who had voted Labour in the last election. Even more telling, when asked whether they trusted Labour to govern effectively anymore, the numbers were devastating. The political damage isn't just about one scandal or one Prime Minister, it's about the fundamental relationship between voters and the political establishment. People are angry, they're cynical, they feel betrayed. And that anger is being directed not just at Starmer personally, but at the entire political class. You could see it in the phone-ins to radio shows where caller after caller expressed fury and disillusionment. You could read it in the comment sections of news articles where thousands of people shared their disgust and disappointment. You could feel it in the conversations happening in pubs and cafes and living rooms across the country. The pressure on Starmer became unbearable as the night went on. His own constituency party issued a statement saying they were deeply concerned by the allegations and calling for full transparency. Trade unions, which had been some of Labour's strongest supporters, released carefully worded statements expressing disappointment and demanding accountability. One major union went further, suspending its financial support to the party until the matter was resolved. Labour Party staff, from senior advisors to junior researchers, were reportedly in shock. Some were said to be updating their resumes knowing that job security in politics is non-existent when a government is imploding. Others were angrily demanding explanations from senior officials, wanting to know how this had been allowed to happen. The party's headquarters became a pressure cooker of recriminations and finger-pointing as people tried to distance themselves from the scandal and protect their own positions. And then, just when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, another leak emerged. This one came from inside the police service. It revealed that law enforcement officials had been investigating some of these allegations for weeks, but had been pressured by government officials to delay making anything public until after important votes in Parliament. This added another layer to the scandal, suggesting not just corruption, but also potential obstruction of justice. If proven true, this wasn't just a political scandal anymore. This was criminal territory. Legal experts appearing on news programmes began discussing the potential charges Starmer and others could face. Misconduct in public office, bribery, conspiracy, even perverting the course of justice. If the allegations about interfering with police investigations proved accurate, the legal jeopardy alone would be enough to force most politicians to resign. But combined with the political pressure and public outrage, Starmer's position had become completely untenable. Inside Downing Street, the atmosphere was reportedly one of panic and resignation. Staff members were seen leaving the building carrying boxes of personal belongings, a clear sign that people believed the end was near. Security personnel were dealing with angry protesters who had gathered outside the gates, chanting for Starmer to resign and holding signs accusing him of betraying the British people. The scene was chaotic, with police struggling to maintain order as the crowd grew larger and more vocal. Senior party officials began the delicate process of considering what comes next. If Starmer resigns, who leads the party? Who becomes Prime Minister? Is there time for a proper leadership contest, or does someone need to step in immediately as a caretaker? And what about a general election? Opposition parties were already demanding that the country go to the polls, arguing that Labour's mandate had been built on false pretences and that voters deserved a chance to make their voices heard. Constitutional experts debated whether the current situation warranted calling an emergency election, or whether a new Labour leader could legitimately form a government without seeking a fresh mandate from voters.